So in 2019, I was asked to make a contribution to the soon to be published series, The History of New Media Art. It will be published this year. My chapter would cover sound. It has taken this long for this chapter to appear, obviously, because COVID kind of affected a lot of things that were going to be happening in the last 2 years. So it didn't genuinely take me over 2 years to write it, but it did in the sense that everything else I had to do and everything else that everybody else had to do was slowed down by COVID. My approach was to write a chapter that was both historical and ahistorical, and to tell a story of the birth of sound and new media technology, covering everything from new music to radio art, performance practice, and sound art, while simultaneously trying to include excluded voices, speaking from a global context, and then explaining that it's not possible to write a linear narrative if you want to be inclusive. So before I begin to talk about the paper titled Sound, Art and New Media, an Alternate History, it's important to note why I have tried to examine inclusivity within sound and music technology spaces and history. In 2015, I founded the Women in Sound, Women on Sound network, as mentioned, in an attempt to redress the gap in the ontological and epistemologies of sound art and new music. This was fed by over a decade's worth of searching for peers who understood my experience as a working class woman trying to work in a field that seemed completely shaped by a very particular social group. That organization over the years has led to the development and formation of peer-to-peer networking and collaboration groups, the creation of events from concerts to symposiums, workshops and exhibitions, whereby women from all walks of life can come together to share both their practice and experiences of being a woman in sound. This has now led to the forthcoming publication of the book, The Body in Sound, Music and Performance. In this book, which is going to print this June and will be available to buy in July, myself and my co-editor and co-WizWaz network partner, Professor Isabel Noguera, have compiled 18 essays written by those who identify as women. These women come from all walks of life and have survived, albeit barely, working in sound through COVID. I will refer to this book in a little more detail at the end of this talk. So first, huge question, what are the sound arts? This isn't a simple question and definitely requires several citations from numerous authors who've written on or about the sound arts. My paper doesn't attempt to address the multitudinous examples of the history written by others. Instead, I want to present a personal perspective built from the development of a practice spanning nearly 20 years, given my age away there. For some, sound is the medium in which we explore the concept of a place, moment, or experience. For others, it is the outcome of technological interactions or interventions. It can be performative, installed, broadcast, or interacted with in a variety of negotiations between sound and listener. It can be a way of communicating both the audible and inaudible, asking the audience to understand that sound is also physical, vibrational, and tangible. Sound artists sometimes collect and archive the sounds of voices and histories of emerging and disappearing sonic environments. Sound art can be concerned with developing techniques and technologies of listening, of training people to listen, of making audible and active social, ecological, or technological engagement. But where to start when thinking about sound art and new media? And this is the big question. So perhaps it's to recall the Fluxus movement and artists such as Alison Knowles and her onion composition, or the African-American artist Ben Patterson and his graphic score Ants. Those scores embody the ideals of interdisciplinary art making in the early 20th century, which saw the importance of mixing mediums and ideas, spaces and places for making and presenting works of sound art. It might be that the earliest technological transformation of sound making, such as Leon Theremin's new instrument, aptly named the theremin, invented around 1919 and the artists who exemplified its performative potential, from Clara Rockmore to Alexandra Stepanov. Or the very modern and strange concert of new musical instruments and new sounds created by Russolo with his, I hope I say this correctly, Intono Ramori instruments, whose intention was to produce sounds which matched the era of machines and technology, to produce music and sounds that reflected the age of noise while preserving a recognizable aspect in processes regularly used for musical creation. So John Cage exemplified the expanded potential of sound as a medium, composing painterly graphic scores with text instructions for any kind of performer, from dancer, singer, instrumentalist to someone who might, within the course of a performance, wind a clock. His use of chance and questioning what is music allowed for a recontextualizing of the potential of sound and music within the arts, including the use of all kinds of technologies and bodies to perform through and with sound. He also amplified the potential for silence to allow for the presence of sound in the everyday. Audiences, socially trained to see a performance as the playing of an instrument, are forced to face an uncomfortable silence or pay attention to the ambience around them in his composition 433. The composers Pauline Oliveros and Brian Eno have followed this interrogation of ambience and silence as forms of composition through Oliveros' deep listening method and Eno's ambient compositions. We could expand on the ways in which storytelling emerged in quite political ways within performances that crossed the boundaries of composition and performance art and utilized emerging recording technologies. Steve Reich and Laurie Anderson exemplify this process, in particular with Reich's Come Out, a piece made of a loop sentence. I had to open the bruise up and let some of the bruise blood come out to show them. A recording of a young African-American, Daniel Ham, who was arrested and beaten by riot police in 1964. The work loops continuously, beginning to go out of phase after the first few minutes, gradually becoming distorted where the words start to phase across each other as the two channels of sound for which it's performed move gradually out of sync with each other. This work has influenced the work of many artists, including that of Glenn Ligon. Ligon's large-scale painting and screen prints of the words "come out to show them" expressively renders the unspeakable abstraction of racial violence, channeled ambivalently through Reich's systematic structures of reproduction, highlighting the very radical way in which the line between music composition and art has been removed as a result of these early pioneers of sound. Laurie Anderson very much crossed the art-sound divide with the body of artwork that includes sound installations and concerts, as well as performances with a variety of new media technologies. Her piece, Hand Phone Table, places the viewer, listener, at the center of the process. The audience must sit and place their elbows on the table and their hands on their ears. Sound travels through skin and bone conduction from speakers within the table, thus using the body as an active resonator, a sound with no material form until the body is connected. There might be several foundational moments for which sound art as the new media begins, crossing over fields and disciplines, transformed through interactions with technology, ideas, and environments. Then there are the shifting terms that are appended to the word sound, attempts to fix and/or find a place for it to belong. Sound sculpture, sound art, sound and ecology, which becomes the rather broader term acoustic ecology. The word sound implying a deep relationship to the engagement, act, or construction of a body of work. In the arts, where our relationship to the visual is embedded within so much of our structures, sound has found a place as a physical medium, one where objects are built for both the ears and the eye to engage with, leaving behind the ambiguous, often difficult link between the sound arts and music, the sonic arts and music and the sound arts. In this way, the creation of bodies of works which can be fixed in a space and interacted with link sound as a medium and concept more closely to the visual arts. However, identifying sound as a media rather than medium is problematic, as it ignores the very particular ways in which artists have worked with the oral, and audible, inaudible of sound. To work with sound as a medium is to understand it as an aural experience, heard both within and without the body, as ephemeral, something which passes through space and time and leaves only memory as a trace, as embodied, related both to technological experiences of immersive audio and to the experience of folding the sounds of experience unto oneself, to have sound written into the bodily experience of place. Sound art has at its core a desire to move the I away from the center of all experiences. For many artists, when working with sound as a medium, there is a focus on examining the sensory, the sensorial, one where the discussion doesn't center on a single sensory experience or moment, but on the navigation of a concept, the development of a methodology, and the creation of works of art. In listening and working with sound as a medium, the artist seeks to draw the listener away from first experiencing sound as the sound of things. Instead, they rely on the human condition to listen with, as Donita suggests, an extraordinary richness of distinction and the capacity to discern minute differences of auditory texture. Then they bring an awareness to the relationship between the body and sound object, whether materialized through audio technologies and heard, felt through the body, or manifested as corporeal objects reflecting sounding concepts, such as Catherine Richards' Charged Hearts. In Richard's piece, the audience holds a bell jar containing a sculpted glass heart. The jar and heart, fitted with sensors, reads your heartbeat, transforms this sound sensation into another material, a phosphorescent cloud, signaling the transformation of one source, sound, to another, gas. This work signals what Dyson calls the total immersion of the individual in electromagnetic signals. Sound is implied as integral, the heartbeat, the sending of pure information, the transformation then of one sensory material to another. So let's look at some beginnings of sound art and media types. For most artists, the use of sound within the arts means crossing over and between ideas about music, performance, installation, and object-based art. If we look at some of the earliest work of arts where sound is at the core or conceptual heart of the work, we see direct links between sculptural processes of making, from Duchamp's With Hidden Noise, to the multimedia sound works of the Gutai Art Association in Japan during the 1950s, with works such as Atsuko Tanaka's work Bell, and the ephemeral and philosophical piece Box with the Sound of Its Own Making by Robert Morris. However, sound has also crossed mediums. Max Neuhaus's RadioNet activated public broadcast media in a way that musique concrète composers envisioned with the development of radiophonic art in the 1940s. For artists such as Schaeffer, the radio was this miracle machine, this chamber of wonders, which led to the development of works such as La Coquille à Plante, perhaps one of the first radiophonic operas. However, the links between performance art and sound are as strong as any, as well as the ways in which technology has expanded the field of sound within performance, tape being one of the earliest tools in the sound artist box for mixing and editing for live performance. Alvin Lucier's seminal work, I'm Sitting in a Room, could be seen as the precursor to the performance works of Pauline Oliveras, Pamela Z, Kathy Matthews, and Janet Cardiff. However, in talking about sound and the performing arts, I think it's important to say that it's quite often an assumption that any person or moment is in fact the precursor to other movements in the sound arts, or even that these movements shape the development of artists. Rather, it's important to acknowledge the diverse ways in which sound in the visual arts has been created because of several collaborations across disciplinary processes and technological innovations. For example, it would be easy to say that the works of artists such as Jean Tinguely influenced the creations of Harun Mirza, but that ignores the actual non-linearity and biased way in which history is written. It also ignores the way in which people have or are denied access to particular epistemologies, or the way in which certain histories have been exemplified or reified as the ultimate form of knowledge production. Linking earlier practitioners to contemporary artists also denies the voices of those not written into history, yet might have had an influence within the sphere of their creative worlds. But sound as an idea within the arts is also problematic. It is its own medium, its own art form, part of the broader area of the sonic arts and music technology, and sometimes even a contested site because of these different connections and relationships. In some ways, bringing forward sound into the traditional white cube space has led to sound art being defined as niche. The ontology of sound within the arts, or even using the term sound art, is seen as equally problematic because of the inherent links between music and sound. In using sound as a process for making art, there are often crossovers in the orthodoxies related to particular ways of production tied to economy, education, and reception. Simultaneously, we see that the emergence of technologies from radio to speaker systems, portable recording technologies, and new media technologies from synthesizers to computers and online networks is shifting how composer, musician, and artists begin to work with sound as material and concept. The process of art making, from performance to public artworks, installations, multimedia, and multisensorial works, sometimes crosses the lines of our understanding of visual artworks and new music composition and performance. While the act of making, broadcasting, or synthesizing sound has closer ties to that of modern music, from the beginning of the 20th century with the art of noise movement, it is the development of new media technologies that allow for the assemblage of visual art and music concepts to align as sound. Those working across the boundaries of sound, music, and art have created innovative works that draw attention to architectural acoustics and perception, the potential of interdisciplinarity and chance. Fluxus created a moment for sound to emerge as a part of the visual arts, but not necessarily a fixed or coherent art form. But the development of artists who cross these branches of sound show a line of progression, not necessarily connection, from the early 20th century. Yannis Xenakis, John Cage, Ben Patterson, Namjoon Pak, Charlotte Moorman, Yoko Ono, Alison Knowles, Mieke Shiomo, and Anaya Lockwood, to contemporary new media sound artists, Ambel Skoos, Samson Young, Christine Sun Kim, Madeleine Mabida, and Elsa Mabala. These artists have traversed the question of what is art, what is sound, and what can be music. We see the obvious link between our histories of music composition and the sound arts in the evolution of the score and performance as a work of art, an artifact, alongside the development of new instruments, a process which has been replicated and advanced by many artists working in sound. Teresa Sauer's 2009 book, Notations 21, highlighted the very complex and beautiful way in which visual graphics have been developed to connote sound, to make visible the potential audible in the more than 100 graphic scores, some very clearly connected to traditional notation, though very much interpretive works for musicians or other performing artists. Jennifer Walsh's piece, This Is Why People OD on Pills and Jump from the Golden Gate Bridge, works very much as a multimedia audio-visual artwork incorporating text, images, the voice, instruments, and video work. Marina Rosenfeld's Teenage Lontano, a cover of Ligeti's 1967 orchestral work Lontano, involved the development of a new scored work with a performance devised for 34 teenagers. The teenagers wore headphones and MP3 players. In one ear, the singers heard Rosenfeld's voice and sang along, and in the other ear, they heard the sounds of the space and the singer closest to them. The performance was presented with the audience surrounding them and the audience surrounded by additional layers of electronic music. For many sound artists, the presentation of their work takes the form of multiple iterations. Sound being seen as both located in galleries, presented in temporal performances, and sometimes as online works, such as those developed by Artificial Memory Trace, EGF poem producer Anea Lockwood, Pamela Z, and Paula Garcia. A number of contemporary artists working in sound in general use multiple platforms to develop, install, perform, and present their works. In fact, it's simpler to locate sound within new media art rather than the sound arts, because the framing is located and connected to technology. When we explore the contemporary artists working with sound as a medium, the lines that divide between the ontology of music and art seem to, in some cases, disappear, become irrelevant in the process of responding to concepts, new technology, and in particular, space. Technique, as is related to the sound arts, and the way in which technology in pedagogy or research has at its core both the gendered and racial bias, or as Adams argues, the obdurate nature of the association of masculinity with technology, though sound and technology aren't alone in these historical biases. Technology as gendered, as racialized, as classed, impacts on the use, proliferation, development, and fundamentally the engagement with technology in the creative arts, whether music technology or the sound arts. The focus on media technology in the making of sound art has inherently excluded communities of artists whose access to homogeneous forms of music technology courses excludes them from both the dialogue and networks where discussions on innovation, supports for opportunities, and access to new ideas become centered and protected. The contemporary place that I sit is to give hope, shed some light at the end of the tunnel as we meet a broader spectrum of artists located within this field, a move only made possible by the efforts of numerous researchers, writers, practitioners, and groups. There now exists emerging bodies of work, from books to articles, websites, and exhibitions that have attempted to redress the focus of the history and development of contemporary sound artworks and artists away from the white European male perspective. One example is the exhibition Sounds Like Her, curated by French Cameroonian art historian, critic, and curator Christine Ayen in 2017. This exhibition featured the works of 7 female artists from diverse cultural perspectives, whose practice or work for this exhibition had a focus on sound. The purpose of the exhibition was not to present a single conceptual viewpoint or to frame the body of work as situated within a feminist or post-feminist context, but rather to highlight the very diverse ways in which women work with sound and within the field of sound art, and how various socio-cultural, racial, and gendered experiences, as well as abilities, offer different perspectives on what sound art can be when difference is recognized and included. During my career, I found it difficult to locate different forms of sound art practice. This pushed me to reach out to international communities of primarily women, as my background has had a focus on feminist theory and practice. It introduced me to the many ways in which women around the world work with sound as a medium. Several of the resources I have used to develop this chapter and which shape my practice are from first-hand experience and conversations, workshops and collaborations, online discussion boards, extensive searches, as well as traditional text-based sources. I also recognize that for many contemporary sound artists in the West, or where Western pedagogy takes the lead in academia, there are key influential figures for which we cannot ignore their influence, simply because they've been the main source of knowledge for many students and emerging artists. But to ignore the social and political constructs that shape how knowledge is consumed and produced further embeds the patriarchal systems of power production within higher learning and within the arts. As founder of Women in Sound, I've worked with women from around the world who have talked about quite different forms of knowledge sharing, of influences on their practice, of new forms of participatory practices that allow them access to media technology to create new modes of making. Although the beginnings of sound art may seem very homogeneous, it isn't now, and in reality it never has been. Rather, it is the disinclination for historians of technology and the arts and sound to include the voices of others within these histories, and in some cases the continued lack of attention given to the broader contributions made more globally by artists working in sound. I'm taking the approach of Linda Nochlin here, that is, ignoring the question of where are all the great women and other non-male, non-white contributors to this area of art practice. We're all quite aware that economic and political structures, as well as systems of colonialism and patriarchy, have excluded vast numbers of people from the arts and from representation within the arts. Instead, I foreground the present while addressing the recent past contributors to this art form. So now let's explore sound art as an interdisciplinary practice. The emergence of new technologies brings with it an endless possibility of new iterations, new hacks, and new aesthetics. With advances in immersive media technologies, virtual simulated worlds, and the almost endless possibilities with coding languages, artists working with sound as a medium have emerged as some of the most interdisciplinary. From artists working with architectural acoustics and digital standing waves, such as Sajo, Sabine Schaefer, and Joachim Krebs, to Don Scarf's lenses, a work which makes audible the vibrational acoustics of glass. Additionally, the sound arts are innovative in the inclusion of concepts related to listening, both as a technique within the arts and as a social, ecological, and artistic acquired methodological practice. The works of artists such as Kirsten Rees, Jimena Alarcón, Antia Gray, aka Poem Producer, and Janet Cardiff have explored how sound technologies can inform a very different kind of art practice by focusing on differences between listening and hearing, whether with technology or through embodied practices. Listening within the sound arts has become a social or political movement. Listening has informed the development of movements such as acoustic ecology, noise studies, soundscape studies, and the development of sonic ethnographic research. Each field has been shaped by artists and in turn has impacted on the development of new media technologies to enhance listening as a practice within the arts. The emergence and use of contact microphones, hydrophones, and parabolic microphones, amongst many different kinds of listening technologies within the sound arts, function in multiple forms. It's allowed artists such as Christina Kubich, Leah Barkley, and Christine Son Kim to document sounds beyond human hearing, or creating artworks that reimagine recorded sounds from inaudible or inaccessible spaces. Since the end of the 1970s, Kubich has developed a series of site-specific works and installations that explore the system of electromagnetic induction. These often take the forms of walks where users wear headphones, designed and co-constructed by Kubich, that pick up the electromagnetic interference in their environments. This practice of mediating inaudible sounds allows the listener to embody and locate themselves within an electronic soundscape previously unheard. Leah Barkley has worked for many years to make the soundscape of our oceans and rivers audible. As a sound artist and environmentalist, she is focused on the capturing and dissemination of these sound environments, exploring active listening as one of the potential tools to save our planet. Through her work, Hydrology and Listening Underwater, Barkley has focused on the use of hydrophones as not just a tool for recording, but as a medium and process for facilitating listening within communities. For Son Kim, a deaf artist working with sound, sound is not just something heard or audible, but a force that can be contextualized through drawings, body language, and performance. As she says in by watching how sound works, I've learned how much it defines a space. Sound is invisible to the eyes, but when people react and behave around it, it becomes visible. I'm trying to remember the text that this is written in, it will come back to me later. We also have what seems like the endless capabilities and possibilities of mobile technologies to facilitate mobile sensory ethnographies. These have allowed for the documentation of changing sonic environments through the stories and experiences of the ethnographers who participate in this evaluation and representation of different sonic locales, such as Milena Dramova's The Everyday Listening Project, which asked participants to create aural postcards, which act as both an archive and a sound moment in time, and as a sound souvenir. Within multimedia devices, we have seen the evolution of audio applications that allow for the live broadcasting of ambient soundscapes and theatrical performances. However, the focus on general forms of technological development and use by artists in the developed West ignores the ways in which artists work with sound as a material in developing countries, where reuse, rebuild, or hack are necessary processes, because technology is either unavailable or too expensive to use. For some sound and performance artists, sharing both technology and training is a key part of working with sound as a medium. In 2018, while working with a group of women in Brazil with my co-collaborator Isabel Nogueira, we found that many of the women working in the sound arts as performers, music technologists, composers, constructed their own technologies for performing or designing sound. Many were self-taught using YouTube and or friends or partners to gain the skills necessary to work with sound and technology. This alters the way in which sound is viewed as a medium. For these women, access to technology is seen as a privilege, which sits alongside education in technology, also seen as a privilege and defined pedagogically as quite masculine. Sound technologies then become quite precious, as it takes time to learn how to build your device, acquire the components, and then acquire the skill to play or use them. Moving from one technology to another, as they're developed, is seen as it's not frugal, it's not beneficial, it's defined as quite wasteful and bourgeois. Access to goods and materials are not so easily available across the globe. For Brazilian sound artists of the early 2000s, in order to work with new media technology, it was necessary to go after devices that were more proximate to their reality. As DeMeo notes, it's a mistake to turn the act of opening the black box into merely technical knowledge with no discussion of the political and aesthetic questions involved in the disruption of the device. This is evidenced in the production of a style of art making in Brazil shaped by the expression gambiarra, meaning to solve a problem through improvised means, a remixing or reimagining of the term DIY. For some artists in Brazil, gambiarra means fitting, fixing, repairing, mending, adapting, improvising, or assembling, as well as hacking, building, programming, pirating, and appropriation. For Cameroonian artists Elsa Mabela and Madeleine Mabida, the process of documenting sound and movement operates from equal forms of exploring cultural practices of listening and performing to sound, while highlighting the very different forms of sonic representation. For Mabida, sound is represented through painting. Her work seeks to capture a style of composition and dancing known as bakutsi. Using color and line, she captures sound as moments of light, bodies, and gesture, which for her distinguish the way in which sound is produced. Mabela's work explores embodied knowledge and language. One of her recent pieces, Addis 63, uses samples of a recording of former Ghanaian President Kwame Nkrumah's speech at the 1963 African Union Congress meeting. The focus of the development of this piece, a combination of vocal poems, sound, and the voice of Nkrumah is to prompt a reaction and a discussion around a subject matter mostly invisible, inaudible to the Northern Hemisphere. It's difficult in some ways to not see technological determinism in the making of sound art and the seeming influence of technology in general within new media art. I suggest that it's more important to see the relationship between technology and art as a form of social shaping of technology. Social shaping advocates exploring both the macrostructures and the microstructures within and around technological development. So, for example, it's important to ask, in what way is access to technology restricted to certain social groups? What education is offered or made available to women, people of color, or certain social classes? What unique ways are technologies adapted to fit the cultural ethos and forms of artistic expression, resistance, and representation? So finally, I want to explore the body in sound, music, and performance, which comes back to the beginning of my talk and our forthcoming publication. Between early 2020 and late 2021, myself and Isabel Noguera worked with over 20 women contributors on a book called The Body in Sound, Music and Technology, or Sound, Music and Performance. In some ways, our approach to editing this book and selecting the writers rests on what Rebecca Schneider might call an exposition of unfolding the body, making explicit the signification that surrounds bodies, where the explicit, the very obvious aspect of some bodies being different from other bodies, are weighted with much historical meaning, folded within cultures of colonialism, sexism, racism, ableism, and classicism. But equally, our approach to bringing the body to the center of subjectivity, to the core of theoretical and methodological significance, is shaped by how central the body has become in many women's practices. The starting point for this might begin with Clara Rockmore and Alexandra Stepanov, who exemplified the embodied performance potential of new musical instruments, or focus on the very explicit bodily engagement of artists such as Yoko Ono or Marina Abramovic, where the potential for physical violence simmers underneath the performance, all the way through Christine Sun Kim, mentioned earlier, for whom sound is not just something heard or audible, but a force that can be contextualized through body language and performance. The body as a site of creative practice is situated at the cusp of socially contextualized and political meaning. The body also exists within various forms of social control, contested ideologies, and as Pagnas affirms, at the empirical level, the body as an entity to be protected, regulated, punished, included, excluded, etc., is itself the object of politics. With the rise of feminism in the 1970s, we see transformations within the arts where the female body as an object to be viewed is countered by, in some parts, a quantifiable contestation of what is absent, thinking here primarily of the Guerrilla Girls poster campaign of the 1970s, which highlighted the absence of women artists in museums and galleries, but the overwhelming presence of their naked forms in works by male artists, which brought to public discussion the fact that politics are not only a matter of sovereign control, but also intrinsic to the domain of the sexed body. There has, however, been an absence of placing the body at the center of discourse in music technology, music performance, and the sonic arts. That's not to say there aren't theorists in music and sound that explore these areas. Thompson, for example, has very much argued for the inclusion of Black and female bodies in epistemologies of knowledge, while Bourne and Devine have critiqued the absence of women in the academic structures of said spaces. Zambo and Yawed argue that we need to explore a more diverse and fluid definition of music technology. But while this may be an argument for the representation of certain groups within these spaces, it doesn't focus on the body as an agent of change, of facilitating transformations in practice. I take, for example, the work of African-American artist Pamela Z, one of the most important performance artists to emerge within the genre of embodied and wearable performance technology. In the 1980s, Pamela's work was shaped largely by live audio processing. It wasn't until the late 1990s and early 2000s that she started to combine Cycling 74's Max MSP with gesture controllers to create performances that involve the use of the body and movement, vocal sounds, and live signal processing. Her performance with Body Synth, created by Chris van Raalte and Ed Zeringhaus in 1994, involves a series of electrodes covering various muscles, which allow her to manipulate sound with physical gestures. In this fusion of movement, technology, and the production of sounds, we see what cyberfeminists call the synthesis of biology and technology. Her continued engagement with embodied technologies amplifies the relationship between the body and sound, using gesture and movement in performance to create a body-sound link which amplifies sonic territories. There is a canon of works in the field of music and sound that is founded on the idea that sound and music are neutral spaces, where our lived experiences are seen as something less important than our process of learning a body of techniques or discourses that already exist. If we consider that the canons in art are occupied by white men from the global north, we need also to consider that gender, race, and global localization are a key point of that canon, and that there is no neutrality at all. In discussion with all of the contributors to our book, we ask that they place their experiences, research, and relationship to their practice at the core of their papers. For us, this approach in itself is an epistemological turn in the sonic arts. The examination of theoretical and historical contributions to the fields of new media and sound art and music technology tend to render out of place certain bodies from history and culture. In Steinskog's Afrofuturism and Black Sound Studies, we're presented with the case study of the different trajectories of Black composers, musicians, sound artists, and technologists shaped by alternative visions of both mainstream culture and future technologies. This is shaped by an awareness that African American voices have other stories to tell about culture, technologies, and things to come. While my paper and this presentation can't offer a fully inclusive rendering of the contribution of sound artists and music and performance artists from around the globe, it's necessary to bring attention and awareness to those who have contributed and to note and understand the absence and silence of people not present. While I attempt to list as many diverse artists as possible within the multitudinal types of new media sound art process developed over the past century, I cannot list all contributors from history who've been ignored for all of the reasons discussed. Instead, where possible, it's important to look for artists in sound from the corners, networks, and places that you haven't explored before.